Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to today's virtual seminar, Making a Career in Art Through Design. My name is Lorena Guzman Diaz, and I am an associate at Weissman Law. It is my pleasure to help guide you through this engaging discussion where we will explore the dynamic relationship between creative practice, design, and the legal considerations that empower artists to build and sustain successful careers. Whether you're an emerging designer, an established artist, or simply curious about navigating the creative industry, today's session is designed to provide you with actionable insights and practical strategies for turning artistic vision into a thriving profession. We'll hear firsthand from Evan Verrilli, an accomplished designer, illustrator, and animator who will share his journey from commercial art and brand design to personal commissions and public art installations. Alongside Evan, we are joined by Adam Weissman, founder of Weissman Law, who will offer essential legal perspectives on intellectual property, contracts, and protecting your creative work in both commercial and public contexts. Our program today will begin with a 35 to 40-minute panel discussion during which our speakers will delve into the realities of starting out in commercial art, balancing personal creativity with client objectives, transitioning to individual commissions, and expanding into public art. We will also address the unique legal and intellectual property challenges that arise at each stage of an artist's career. Following the discussion, we'll open up the floor for a 20-minute Q&A session where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and engage directly with our speakers. Your participation is highly encouraged, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the session. Before we begin, please note that the information shared in this webinar is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. So for guidance on any specific legal matters, we encourage you to consult with a qualified attorney. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Evan Verrilli and Adam Weissman, who will share their experiences and expertise as we embark on this exploration of art, design, and the law. Evan and Adam, welcome and thank you for joining us. Let's get started.
Thanks to everyone who's joining live, as well as everybody who's watching this on YouTube later on. If you've been following us for the last, I'd say 4 or 5 months now, we've been doing these monthly chats, talking about issues that really pop up for us at Weissman Law as representation for creators and producers and folks in the art, entertainment, and media space. We've been focusing mostly on chatting with other professionals, immigration lawyers, business lawyers, litigators, some accountants, but we thought it was time to shift the focus more on the folks that keep us in business and the folks that motivate us to do our job in the day-to-day, and that's the artists and the different creators that we work with. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the first artist that we're bringing on our free webinar chat, Evan Verrilli. And let me just, before I give him the floor, give a little bit of introduction about Evan. I've known Evan for a handful of years. We're working together, I'll say, in the commercial design space and have been helping each other out in the illustration space. But what is even more exciting for me, maybe less exciting for him, is Evan is the guy who actually designed all of the illustrations on our website as well as the website itself. So all of the branding you see behind Weissman Law is the genius of Evan. So as excited as I am to talk to Evan about his experience as an artist and a designer and everything that's happened throughout his career, I'm also excited to talk to him about how much fun it's been to have a lawyer as a client. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Before we dive into our questions, I just want to turn and give the floor to Evan to say hi to the audience.
Hey everybody. I always struggle to kind of frame my career and talk about myself, but to give it a shot. My name's Evan Verrilli. I'm a Midwest-based artist and designer. I've kind of always wanted to be an artist since I was a kid, so I've always been making things ever since I was just a little kid watching TV while everybody was out on the playground in the sandboxes. But ever since I went into school and afterward, I've been working in the design space and creating work outside of that in my free time. So there's always been this balance I've had to strike between the work that pays my bills and then the work that fulfills me. So even when I've found that in commissions and for instance doing the website for Adam, which was an extreme pleasure, just in terms of like being able to every single time I asked him, like, are you sure? Like, because I'm so used to hearing no in this industry that, like, when I show him a thing and be like, what do you think about these? He's like, I just want you to do it. I'm like, oh, okay. So it was very much a pleasure in that way to be able to like create work that felt close to the type of work that I want to show to the world, and like also be able to connect my brand voice to his brand voice and show something that like helped promote him in the world. Um, but yeah, in terms of my career, it's been circuitous from being going to school for industrial design to working in experiential marketing slash 3D design, so like event spaces and stuff, to around the pandemic, transitioning into digital design and working for different tech companies while balancing a uh, commercial slash commissions based practice. And in the past few years, I've transitioned into art installations through Blink Cincinnati in 2024. And I'm doing another one this year in Madison for Gleam, which is they do this yearly art installation piece for 2 months at the conservatory in Madison, Wisconsin. So I'm designing a light installation that's going to go up there. So just always trying to get my hands dirty and make some stuff.
Cool. And we're going to ask you a bunch of questions about your installation work probably towards the end, because that is some really exciting stuff that I've had the pleasure of getting to sort of see behind the scenes firsthand with that. But before jumping there, let's take a step back, maybe to the first handful of steps. So let's talk about sort of leaving school. You know, a big concern or a big thing that Lorena and I focus on with our clients is obviously sustainability, ensuring not just success on a per job basis, but sort of longevity as an artist, and being able to provide for yourself and obviously make a living. You kind of alluded to some of this already, but could you tell us sort of the transition, let's say, out of school into, stepping into the art world for maybe personal projects and individual commissions versus what it looked like on the commercial side getting into there? I would love to hear sort of how those first handful of years worked out, maybe through the pandemic or beforehand, and how they're complementary and how maybe they are not so complementary.
Yeah. So when I was blessed to be able to go to a school that had a co-op program. So I went to the University of Cincinnati's DAP program, Design, Art, Architecture, and Planning. I was transparently in the wrong major while I was there, so it was a lot of like this. But because of that, that always made me want to grow outside of just what my professors were saying and what I was being shown in the classroom. So I was always exploring. I've been keeping a sketchbook practice most of my life, so I really dove into that. I had different jobs when I was in school, just working as like working as an industrial designer, experiential marketing, and then working in the environmental graphic space to kind of push more into environmental like graphic design. But what that kind of meant whenever I graduated was I ended up moving to New York and then promptly moving back home because of the pandemic. Um, because like that industry kind of shut down for a bit, much like a lot of things did. That afforded me the opportunity to push more into illustration and be more like, which was my passion and kind of is my passion, to kind of create images and get my voice out that way for different clients. Um, and so I was kind of afforded that opportunity because there really didn't really feel like there were a lot of opportunities, but that as somebody who's very like systematic in how maybe not how I do things, but how I think about things, I very much was like, all right, here's my plan, here's what I got to do. And I just made sure to draw every day and create as much as possible. But in terms of the longevity in the career, which especially with like big topics today, like AI and I don't know, just the effervescence of creativity and the industries that we find ourselves in. The way I've positioned myself and been able to survive, even though I've been out of school probably like what, 7, 8 years, was always being positioning myself as more of a tradesman, of like having a broad skill set and being able to be somebody who can get things done very quickly. So whether that was learning these 3D modeling programs, learning how to communicate with clients, learning the legal side of how I actually set up an MSA, and negotiate contracts, and then on top of that, delivering the work in a timely fashion. Um, it's always just been kind of like broadening my skill set as much as possible. So that way, if like, for instance, if somebody decides that they don't want to hire me for illustration, well, maybe I'll know how to put those in an asset, or I'll be able to just design a marketing campaign, or I'll be able to work on somebody's website and work with an engineer, or work on somebody's app and be able to like help implement things with either like 2D design or animation. And so it's really just like trying to keep that skill set as broad as possible, so that way I'm able to like take in as much work as I can. Lately, the past few years, I've pushed back from that because I've gotten to a place where I'm actually more comfortable, which is strange. And that's kind of led more into like focusing on these bigger art projects, because I think kernel of my career that I've always like, ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to be an artist, like I said, and I've tried, which is a good story, but it's true. But I've tried to propel that forward through all of the work and making sure I have capital to support any wacky idea I have. So part of the benefit of being in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where I'm located, studio space is cheap. I can paint whenever I want. I There aren't a ton of economic opportunities for that kind of work, but I'm able to sustain myself with the design work. And then on top of that too, really just seeing what opportunities are directly around me and being able to like cater my skill set to it, to actually be like a true multi-hyphenate and multidisciplinary person. So,
Cool.
uh,
A lot of interesting points. I want to pull out a few items and maybe come back to those and focus on them a little bit. Um, you mentioned over your career, the last 7, 8 years, you've been able to sort of take that really broad set of services and start narrowing it, maybe saying no to some clients in ways that you wouldn't have at the start of your career. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I will tell you, we see that with a lot of our clients as well, like other clients in different disciplines and also in similar disciplines where, yeah, when you're starting out, you want to make a name for yourself and you'll take on any job. But I want to hear sort of how the selection process has changed over the years as you've gotten more experience and have been exposed to more clients and different type of work.
yeah, yeah, because whenever I had this vision of being an illustrator and being one of those names like an Igor Bastidius, or like what's that guy's name? Like Peter Max, Seymour Schwaist, all those guys. Those two guys from the 60s, one guy who's currently making stuff. But like the and so I always wanted like my voice to be attached to these, maybe it wasn't particular brands, but like to be able to be attached to these big projects. What I realized over time though was that those folks kind of become the face for an idea, that idea being their style or expression, whether they create it or not. Like they'll have a team of people maybe, or they'll have other people do the sketches. And really to get to that point where you are hired just for that specific style is really a blessing, and it's kind of like a hard leap to make. Um, and I actually got to a point when I was at Zip, my previous role, I was doing the illustration style for the whole company. So I anytime they needed illustrations, I was the one producing those and putting those into the app, putting those on walls, wherever. And it was really cool to be able to see like that brand voice come out for like a tech company, basically. Um, but it really, to make a career that's that specialized and specific, it if you're not at a certain level, it ends up limiting the opportunities you can get. So what I found from I kind of did two things. Like I broadened, got out of school, just wanted to take whatever was coming at me. Like when I moved to New York, I got hired as a 3D designer at Giant Spoon. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do this during the day, and then I'm going to go home and draw, and I'll be able to get clients that way. And New York was exhausting. And how I approached New York wasn't a good way to do it, in terms of I did have a mission, but I didn't have a plan. And so I wasn't able to actualize in the way I wanted to while I was out there. And so the pandemic became a blessing because it sort of forced me to limit my scope and focus on the things I wanted to do. And I started getting a lot more illustration projects and illustration clients. And interestingly, when I was finally sustaining myself by doing that kind of work, which I never thought I'd be able to do, I realized that I was starting to get bored of it. And I liked having the variety of different things to do, like doing animation or doing design or like even painting or whatever, just being able to step away from a screen. Um, so it has been kind of always this balance of back and forth. And I sort of focused more on finding a job and having that job be something that, because it's a big blessing to have a creative job, um, especially when you're not in a big city. But I started focusing more on like, all right, I'll do this, all the work they need me to do at this job. And then in my free time, I'm not going to necessarily take on clients unless it's like a big client or something I'm passionate about, but I'm just going to focus on the work I want to do. So if that's like taking photos or making videos or just like taking a walk in the park, like sort of, I don't know, as an artist, I think I like turn the creative practice into just being a regular person. So, which I think is necessary to actually creating work, because no matter what I do, I'm always going to be making something.
Does being a regular person also entail sort of having an actual social presence online? How does that translate?
Yeah, that's hard because for a few years, especially early in the pandemic, that was like you started to see all these people blow up on the internet, and it sort of felt like it was right there, but like just out of reach. Like you could just make one more thing and then people would notice it. But for me, that didn't really happen. I think it was based on where I'm located, because there's just not as many eyes around here. But also, I think it's just because it's a rare thing to do. But the So for a while, I was really creating work for social media at a pretty intense clip. Like it would be two or three posts a week, creating these like fully realized projects that I would just put out as posts or as stories or as reels or something. And after a while, it just kind of became repetitive and unfulfilling. What I've noticed about social media for me is that you have, especially as an artist, you create the same thing again and again and again, and that's how you get noticed. Like if you're making an illustration, you make the same style of illustration again and again and again, and people really like it. And there's people I follow who do that. But what I've realized about me and about my practice is that doesn't feel authentic to how I do things. So maybe one week I'll t make paintings that take months and I'll put them up and then I don't really care if people like them or they see them, but I like to do that. Or like maybe I have an idea for an animation and I just make that really quickly. Maybe I learn another 3D modeling program. And the way I kind of transition my focus in social media is more of like, which is in the tagline of my Instagram, is it's just more of a focus on my creative output, whatever that ends up being. But there is kind of this like content creation mentality that I do think is interesting and helpful. And I am trying to figure out how to be more of a like personality on there as well as create more videos because that's like one way to gain more traction, get more work. And as well as I think it's like fulfilling to kind of find a way into that medium in a way that I enjoy. Like I'm kind of thinking of it as like poetry or video essays. So,
Yeah, I think that area of video that's been coming popular in the last few years is really the audiences like to see inside artists' process, which is not something that people used to have access to. So it's really interesting to see a lot of that stuff pop up. But at the same time, if you are going to do that, you need to do it in a way that actually makes sense for you, as opposed to something that feels completely artificial. So it's a tough line to figure out. I want to go to another piece that you pointed on when you were speaking before, which is something that not a lot of newer artists necessarily think of, but I'm sure this is something that you've learned more and more about, especially as you're getting more into the commercial space where the clients are maybe a little more demanding, is responsiveness and just simple things like answering emails and text messages. Tell us a little bit about that and maybe how things might have changed from, let's say, day one to day today.
hmm. Well, I work for a company on the West Coast, so my hours are a little wacky. Um, I I've always been fairly responsive to emails. I think in my head, whenever I get an email, I like there's this internal clock that ticks, and I'm like, how many hours have gone by?
Mhm.
So I limit it. I try my best to respond within, at the most, 48 hours, but usually within 24. It's kind of been supercharged at my job because it's very like fast paced and all of that. Um, but I think for me, what it is kind of establishing these working hours to when I respond to things. Um, like, and it's the same. I think of it as a relationship with any friends, family, whatever. It's like if it's unless it's like an emergency or something, I'm probably not going to respond after like 8 p.m., but I will respond the next morning at like 9 a.m. or something. So, um, what I've realized with a lot of clients is that it's rarely something that needs, especially because like I don't want to diminish what I do because I think it's interesting to see the type of work that I do everywhere in the world. Like you go to Times Square, you go to like to turn on your TV, all that kind of stuff is there. But at the end of the day, I'm just like putting ads in an app. So like it is important, but other people are doctors. So so I like I like to level set that way to just be like, listen, if I'm getting too many pings, like see what's due when, make sure I'm like on schedule for the things I need to do, and then otherwise just like make some space so that way you can make dinner and enjoy your time with your family. So,
Yeah. Otherwise, what's the point of life if you can't take a step back? But I think,
yeah.
yeah, expectation setting is a big deal with clients, regardless of what industry you're in. And I think part of it is I talk to so many artists that we work with, and it's not necessarily something they're teaching you at art design school. They're not teaching you how to like manage your client relationships. But I don't know if this is a sad thing or just a fact of reality, but regardless of what you're doing, the first thing your clients are thinking about is are you responding to them and getting back to them, and do they feel like they're being taken care of? And your work, which needs to be at its peak and needs to be fantastic, it's a close second, but it's certainly, I feel like clients can make exceptions for little obstacles or hiccups in work than they can in just being unavailable and not accessible, which is tough. It makes it tough because as an artist, I'm sure that's not something you want to be thinking of all the time, but it's certainly what makes clients come back.
Yeah. The interesting thing about design school, art school, whatever creative field you're in is like they really emphasize this idea of quality and of like taste, which I think is very important and it's something I over time I've started to take for granted because when you do something enough, you just expect that everybody else is on your same like level, I guess. Like if you're always doing something, you're like, "Oh yeah, I just drew this picture." And they're like, how did you figure like how did you draw a perfect flower?" I'm like, "I don't know, I just looked at a flower." But but the in art school, design school, like that's why I was grateful for co-ops and internships is because you learned the real world business acumen you needed to actually survive and make work and be able to make money because like that's what the primary goal of college ends up being is like it is you do want to actualize but you want to be able to like make a life for yourself. But the creative, what I've found in my time afterward is because creativity is so subjective, um, your like y as a creative person, your output is like you're just dealing with all these when you're in art school, you're dealing with all these perfectionists all the time. All these people who are like so good at what they do and are told by the professors that they're not good at anything or okay at some stuff. And then like they get out into the world and they're just like achieving at this super high level. And you realize you're just in this, for me, it was this like pressure cooker of these people who were just brilliant, didn't realize how brilliant they were. Um, and because of how high our quality of work got, our 75% is a client's 100%. Because if we were to put 100% of our effort into that, like we wouldn't sleep. And because we're able to achieve at such a high level, we're able to do things like make sure to answer emails on time, sort of know what the client's expectations are, know how to lay the groundwork, give people the different ways into this problem, and really sort of work with people to make sure like, and that's not me saying I'm making bad work for anybody, but that my self-criticism is much higher than any client will ever be. So whenever I hear like this is cool from a client, I'm like, awesome. And then I can
Cool.
go back in my corner.
Well, let's flip that on its head. Have you ever dealt with situations where a client comes back and they're just like, need a total redo, this doesn't fit? Like, how do you respond to situations like that?
Call my girlfriend and complain. I just usually that's happened a few times and it's stuck with me. There was one smaller client I had. I was doing an album cover for him, and with that, I've I try to pick clients based on personality because I think that is much better than even our tastes. Like for instance, when I was working with you, Adam, I knew we would work well together because like just how we communicate and how we are. Um, and when I started to understand like what your tastes were, I was like, okay, yeah, then that fits as well, which I kind of expected because I know you. Um, and that has always proven to me to be more successful relationships than people who I'm like, oh, well, just give me a mood board, I'll figure it out, whatever. Um, and even if I am connected with them, if I feel like there's some sort of link that's not connecting, I don't think the relationship's going to work. So, for instance, I was working with this and that's part of why you build out contracts because you just set everything up. You say, "Hey, I'm going to get this time, this time. If it doesn't work, we got the termination clause. It's fine." And with this one client, they were this musician in town or musician in Nashville because a lot of folks go to Nashville to like kind of try to make it big from Cincinnati. And he really liked my work, was really excited to work with me, had a very particular vision of what he wanted made. And so I tried we hit it off really well. I sent him some images. I like asked him what he liked about the images. He told me very specific things. I made like three different designs for him. He looked at him. He said, I don't like any of these. I was like, okay. Went back, redid everything, just did like a whole new design for him. He looked at it, he said, I level set with him because I didn't want to go back and forth too much. And maybe I was a little bit too harsh, but I was like, listen, I did all this work. It ended up working out, or you weren't happy with any of them. I'm gonna go back to the drawing board and redo this. What I'm telling you, based on the contract, we have two design rounds. So if I don't get it this time, no harm, no foul. But I just want to let you know. Came back, gave him a fully realized design, probably spent an extra 8 hours on it. He looked at it, he said, I think we're going to go in a different direction. And that was a bummer. It was a big bummer. I was like, I told him he didn't have to pay me for the time. He ended up paying me, but it was one of those things where it was like, in all abstractions, that relationship and that project should have worked. But just because of some unknown factors, I don't it just didn't. And sometimes that happens. Thankfully, that's more rare as time goes on because I think I have a better it's like discernment and kind of trusting your gut. It's really like I think a lot of it is kind of knowing yourself versus knowing how another person's going to be. It's like just so whereas now I if when I'm entering into a uh, work relationship with somebody, I already have an idea of how it's going to go. And I do my best to like use my business acumen and best practices of like responding in time and setting meetings and setting expectations and doing things sort of by the book every time. And sort of create that safety net for myself. Well, if they go this way, then I'm going to do this and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like it's not always that complicated, but it is interesting to see when it works out and when it doesn't. And I think for me, when things don't work out in that way, it becomes this like big post-mortem analysis of like, okay, well, what could I have done differently? How did they respond? Why did this end up going the way it did? And what is there that I could have done better? So
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like we even see that the parallels in our practice in law, where it's the same thing where, I think at this point I can have a client intake and within 5 minutes be like, oh, I know exactly what this client's going to be like. And similarly, we've identified over time the types of clients that work really well with us. It's people who want to sort of get a little bit involved in the process, who similarly aren't like just do the job and I don't want to see how the sausage is made. No, it's artists and producers and businesses who want to learn a little bit as they're going along with us because then they get more informed, and they become better clients too because they know what they want from us. Um, but that just, yeah, that is something you develop over time. I'd say 10 years ago, it might have been tough for me to figure out, but today it's almost instantaneous. Now, this wouldn't be a legal webinar without going into a little bit of legal talk. And I know you've referenced contracts and things like that. So let's start this really broad. I might ask Lorena to hop in and interject a little bit, but would kind of like to understand as a starting point, sort of the different IP considerations you're taking when you're working with a brand versus when you're doing, let's say, personal commissions or even more so just doing stuff for yourself.
Yeah, I think a lot of those considerations are connected to usage and then dollars. So uh, I worked with Current, this what's it called? Like this mobile bank sort of place, this fintech company, and I did some illustrations for their site. And because I had honestly communicated with Adam and like had learned about this idea of licensing versus just doing the work, I was able to put in the contract that, hey, these are licensed for this, and if you want to license for extra things, here is what like we can negotiate costs afterward. Um, for a smaller client, for like somebody in Cincinnati, for instance, that probably won't be part of the negotiation. I might bring it up to them if they seem like they're a uh, somebody with a good amount of business acumen to say like, hey, when you're like, I might put that as a line item, but just say like it's included and be like, hey, license is included in this fee. And so that way you're sort of educating them in what that expectation is moving forward. But where it worked out well for Current was the fact that I did these designs for their website, these like illustrations, and then they reached out to me about 3 months later and said that they wanted to use them in the app. And so then I sent them a separate invoice for the license in the app, and that allowed me to basically make a little bit of passive income off of this work I'd already done. Um, but I wouldn't have been set up for that had I not had a little bit of legal acumen to be like, all right, I need to include this in my contract. So, because it
Yeah,
could,
yeah. And I think every single artist, no matter what medium you're working in or what type of clients you have, need to have an understanding of sort of copyright and licensing. And more importantly, what the norms are in your specific industry, because it's different in every sort of vertical. You know, a photographer is going to have very different standards than an illustrator or a brand designer. And understanding that is key. And Evan, I really like the point you made with that one client of, yeah, you're going to give them everything, but you're at least going to set it out in writing so it's clear exactly what they have. Because if that's not stated somewhere, who knows what the expectations actually are? And more importantly, you're teeing things up for next time. Um, so figuring that out, and I think also chatting with like your colleagues and the people in your space about pricing is a big deal too, because you don't want to price things in a black hole, come out either way under market or way over market. You want to make sure that like for your experience and the type of work you do and what you're providing, the price you're giving matches folks that maybe you consider them a competitor. But I know the way I talk about it, and I even talk about this with other lawyers, is if they're working in your space, consider them a colleague, and really get to know them and get to understand who's doing what, how they're doing it, what they're putting in those contracts, what they're normally licensing stuff out as, because it's going to make the community as a whole stronger and give everybody a little bit more leverage to get exactly what they deserve. Um, Lorraine, you want to ask some really specific legal questions to Evan?
Of course. So to talk a little bit about your public art installation work, like what should artists be aware of when it comes to IP rights and public art installations, and how does that differ from maybe like your commercial brand work or your individual commission work?
a big component of public installations is the marketing. And that's where I think IP kind of comes into place. So when you're building a thing, it's so large that I don't think anybody else wants it. So it's like you can say like this is
Evan,
my
can you give
idea.
can you give some context and describe maybe what the last thing you built was?
Yeah, so I built a 100-foot long red light installation in an alley in Cincinnati. I actually, Lorena, if you have
You
photos
can
of it,
show us.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it
I'm
should
gonna
be.
pull I'm gonna pull that up. That's Blink 2024.
Yeah, it should be like halfway in that presentation I sent you.
I've got it. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if this works
Cool.
so everyone can see exactly what it is that we're talking about.
And I think it's more liability than IP, honestly, because there are like for this, there's which I'm doing another version of this. There was the structural component, making sure that the thing would stand up and not fall. There was getting clearance from the city, which I wasn't in charge of, thankfully. Um, and then there was just making sure that I could like get all of the materials and everything I needed to do. But the so there's the liability aspect of it, which is sort of covered by a lot of these organizations, but you just sort of want to make sure to dot your I's and cross your T's. Um, and then the IP is really, which I think in these kind of light festivals, people are pretty respectful from my experience. Like, for instance, when I was doing Blink installation, there was an agency in town that filmed some video of it, and I actually got the raw files from them. They just sent them to me. And even for the one I'm doing for Gleam, which is going to be a similar thing of slightly larger scale, um, they're also going to take some video and take some photos and send those to me. But really, it's like, I think when you sort of make that jump into being a brand or an artist and are able to kind of like have shows and connect merchandise to your work, it's trying to figure out how you can sort of control those different streams of income. One of the things I learned from putting on an art show last year was that nobody buys art, but everybody buys drinks. So, like, how do you, because what you're doing is you're planning an event. So how do you make sure that um, like you're generating revenue by charging tickets or like taking a percentage of the bar sales, whatever. Like even as far back, I'm reading this book on no, what's his name? Edward Monk, the guy who did the Scream. When he was an entrepreneur in his day where he like people were mad at him, but he made all of his money as an artist by charging ticket sales.
And of
Yeah.
course, all we think of when you say the name Edward Monk now is his artwork,
Yep.
which kind of puts it into perspective. The Home Alone right there. But but like it makes a good point of like thinking of all the angles. Yeah, you're right. When you do a live event like that, people aren't getting, they're not buying miniature versions of your installation or anything like that. So it's really like, how do you reframe things? And the other thing you need to think of, which is something that has popped up as an issue that I've seen a handful of times with other artists, is on the licensing piece. Okay, if you're getting permission to put an installation somewhere and that place is licensing the work from you to have it up for a period of time, what can they do with it? Can they alter it? Can they take pictures of it and sell merch of those pictures? There's all these little things you need to think about that often we kind of just, some artists might assume are granted or not. And if it's not in a contract, it's going to turn into potentially an argument down the road. To Evan's point, you need to think about those things up front, not just because you don't want your work being abused, but if there's a way for you to properly make money off of this, figure that out. Because there might be angles in there that make sense. And if you can get a portion of ticket sales, great. You can get a portion of the bar, that'd be amazing. Although I haven't seen that too often in these spaces. But getting creative is absolutely necessary because yeah, you're not getting paid huge sums of money to do that installation in the first place.
Yeah. And to your point about talking to colleagues and different folks, like that's how I learned a lot of this stuff as well. There's two pieces that I learned. There's one piece I learned from the Blink installation, which is interesting. And then from that art show I did of all my paintings, when I was setting up that art show, or after I set it up, I was actually talking to another local artist, and he was the one who told me, he was like, if you're putting on a show somewhere, because a lot of these things are at like coffee shops or bars or whatever, like you negotiate up front that they pay for the DJ and you get 10% of bar sales. And I'm like, I never thought about that. And they're like, yeah, because otherwise you're paying for it out of pocket. Um, so that was something I learned from a conversation with a contemporary. But for the installation, as somebody who artists are, can be control freaks, for better and worse. So you meet these people who have this very like Tom Sachs is a great example. His whole studio is is the art. I'm not sure. It's not very chill, but it's cool looking when you look at it. He does this like whole thing where he makes a fake space mission and gets all these people to dress up in these little suits and stuff and do these like goofy moves and everything. But that requires a lot of control over the space, and you sort of need to figure out where you assert control and where you kind of let go and let other people kind of activate it. Interestingly, about the Blink installation is, as somebody who is very tries my best to be buttoned up and like in control of my career, every time I asserted um like control over the thing I was doing, I was more successful. So when I did heard a no somewhere, but I talked to the person behind that no, I was able to get a yes. Or if I was worried about something being the way, I talked to a certain person and then I got a yes. And even
Did that come easy to you to be able to do that?
um not really, but it was because it so often in in work you get kind of a lot of these big and little no's and you're sort of hearing from supervisors and their supervisors that you need to do things a certain way. I kind of had to remind myself that this was like, and other folks were really gracious to remind me that like this is your idea and um you're making this happen. So even if you're going to be like not a jerk but like be very specific, like you have a right to be so. And like the I had to keep reminding myself that the work I was doing was valuable. And even after the fact, I had to remind myself that because I did this, something like the city of Cincinnati got 5 million visitors. So the work that I did, at least 2 million people saw. Um, and that is not nothing. That is a really big thing. And for instance, when I was putting up because I designed it, built it, installed it with a bunch of people and all this kind of stuff. I had this whole community of folks, and that idea of ownership was really interesting to me. But the when I was on site putting up the trussing, which is like the goalpost structure, I remember specifically because there were all these like day laborers coming to help, and the company that was in charge of the trussing was a mess. People on site were wonderful, but their bosses were a mess. So they were trying to figure out how this thing got put together, and they had assembled half of it, and they were about to put up the goalposts. And I was like, I need to make sure this is right. So I measured everything, and I was thinking about it in that moment, and I was like, okay, this isn't right, but it'll look okay if I put it up. And then I was like, no, this is your thing. Like, you have to say something. You're the guy. And so I was like, this is wrong. We got to fix this. And they're like, all right. And they fixed it, and it ended up being right. But had I not said anything, it would have been like, and I would have been like, that's fine. That looks good.
Glad you did.
So,
That's a good lesson to be learned, I think. Yeah. Remember, you're the guy that they're bringing in. Like it's not like they come up with this idea and they're like, "Oh, we just need someone to implement this." It's no, this was your idea. So it makes sense that you're sticking up for the piece at the until the very, very end. And I really love how manage to also take a step back when you're done and find the value not just in and of the work, but also in how much attention it brought to the space and the city in general, which is absolutely massive. And I don't think that can be understated for you or for really anybody else working on a project that like, yes, there's this beautiful, almost selfish aspect to art when you're doing something. And I think when you're inside of it, that's usually a motivation you need to keep in your head. Like, this is the thing I'm creating for me. But then take a step back when you're done. And if you lose sight of the context of the fact that, like, yeah, the goal is to get eyes on this and to touch people in certain ways, and you did. It's
yeah.
huge. And going back to your importance in it, of course, you need to stand up for yourself. And I hope artists take these kinds of lessons to heart, that it's incredibly important to be assertive when it comes to if you're working on a group project and you're the one leading it, what to say. And I'm sure that's a huge shift from staying in your apartment and working on your computer, just drafting stuff. So it makes a lot of sense. We've got
Mhm.
about 10, 15 minutes left. We're going to keep asking questions, but I want to encourage the live audience to type, whether on LinkedIn or Zoom, any questions you have for Evan or myself and Lorena. So please start typing those in. We'll see those in real time as those pop up. But since we don't have any yet, Lorena, you want to ask a couple more questions from Evan?
I have a question, but none that Evan would have prepared for. So you were talking about how like your installation brought in so many visitors. I feel like that must have given you or like given your art such a big sense of purpose. How do you find that when working with brands or maybe other individual commissions? Where do you look for that purpose in what you're doing?
Um, that's an interesting question.
Sorry,
Well,
philosophical question.
yeah, well, a lot of like the light installation was interesting because of the community. Guy, I called it the cathedral because of like a few different things. Um, but the one being the fact that it's this thing that you build that's bigger than yourself. I'm not a very religious person, but like it's a thing you build that's bigger than yourself that you bring other people in to build for like a bigger reason than you. And what was cool about that is when I was working with people, all these people showed up in different ways that like really have touched me. And I was able to, I tried my best to like be somebody who was always trying to put others first in that way. So like if anybody asked me about the light installation, I'd be like, yeah, I designed this, but like this person helped me set it up. This person helped me make these pieces. This person was there in the studio cutting wires, like but and like just trying to make sure that it became very community oriented, even though like my name was on it. And I actually would tell people that, and my friends who were helping me would be like, no, this is your thing. So I think you should focus on your ownership. And that always kind of made me uncomfortable. But to kind of answer your question about like how I find that like, did you say purpose?
Yeah, kind of like similar. If you're able to find it in like the commercial,
Yeah.
when working with commercial brands or other commissions.
Transparently, I've struggled with that. Even from like Zip was the first time I felt like my voice was showing up at a in a brand, but there was so many layers to how that got out and like so many different stakeholders who said you got to move this way and do this way that by the time it got out, it was definitely of me, but it didn't feel like me. Um, so where I've kind of focused and been able to like if I do an album cover, it's really cool to see the band play and then see them like handing out CDs. Like the the thing is just a vehicle for people to like experience the music, really. Or if I'm doing some ads for Instacart, the joy I get is in like communicating with the copywriter and the art director and working with like the different agencies or the marketers or whatever and really trying to like create this camaraderie and create this more community atmosphere. Because and I've said this at work, like it doesn't really matter to me all the time what kind of project I'm on, but really who I'm working with. So it can be the coolest project in the world, but if I don't enjoy who I'm working with, I'm probably not going to want to do it. But it can be a really lame project, but if I really like the people, then I'm gonna put all, it's gonna be a lot easier to put my best foot forward. So I think that's where I find the purpose is in really prioritizing the people versus the work.
That
So
makes a
what
lot.
motivated you to pursue art installations and how did your background in design kind of prepare you for or like help you in that transition?
Well, I had always, like I said, I always wanted to be an artist and really was just looking for some way in. The in terms of economic opportunities in this town, there's not a ton when it comes to like there. I know I have a few friends who show in galleries who have like stuff in the Cincinnati Art Museum and have kind of pursued those paths. But what I heard, I think it was from Wim Wenders. It was like some in like Instagram reel or something. He was talking about like when you're a young artist, don't do the thing that everybody else does. Do the thing that you're best at. So if you're not the best painter, don't be a painter. But if you're the best videographer, be a videographer. Like, and I thought about that because I've been doing paintings for a while, and I'm not the best painter, and especially in town, I'm not the best painter. And I enjoy it, but it wasn't the thing that I thought was gonna take me to that next level. I got this opportunity sort of by chance because I was connected with the right people and have been showing up for a while that they were like, "Oh, you have this idea? Sure, figure it out." I'd never touched electricity before, but I what I ended up doing was I applied my 3D design skill set to model it and figure out how it would fit in space. And so that way I could also make marketing materials. And then on top of that too, I employed my sort of industrial design slash design skill set of like, all right, here's the problem. How do I approach this in a systematic way to like make a plan to get this thing done? So what components do I need to make for each of the light bars? Who do I need to talk to make sure I'm making the right like through getting the right materials? Who do I talk to make sure this thing has a structure around it? And really asking a lot of these questions and sort of so it was like the blind leading the blind a little bit, but it was sort of figuring out what questions I wasn't asking and then just sort of putting in a lot of effort and just pushing through as many walls as I could.
Cool.
So
Gonna shift gears slightly. Got one question on LinkedIn, very technical legal question. So I think I'll try responding to this first. Evan, if you have anything to add after, by all means, please feel free to interject. So Joshua Davis asks, for outdoor installations in public spaces, what are the licensing considerations for production companies, for example, who may film or photograph the work to incorporate into their project? So generally speaking, if you have a art installation in a truly public space, um, there are some actual fair use exceptions that allow you to film or photograph that without getting into copyright trouble necessarily. Now, a couple things to think about that, we do a lot of production work, and so this comes up pretty frequently. A lot of spaces that people think are truly public in the like legal sense of true public spaces are actually semi-public or semi-private. So you want to be really careful about that. For example, Evan, I think the spaces you were in, those all required paid admission, right?
for Blink, no.
For Blink, no. Okay. So, but for other stuff, have you had private spaces you've been working in?
I mean, at honestly, no. Like I put stuff up at coffee shops and put stuff up at art
Okay.
galleries and stuff, but there's never
So
really
for
been.
Blink, I mean, for Blink, people might have been able to photograph and record that without necessarily getting your permission. And that's just something you have to deal with. It's sort of like how if you're ever on a sidewalk, you can take pictures of building fronts and logos and things like that. Things to think about, though, again, knowing definitively whether something is public. But the other pieces too, there's all these trademark considerations that you need to start thinking about. And I think particularly in the space public art installations, which are somewhat often more functional than, let's say, traditional artwork, like a painting by comparison, you need to start thinking about, okay, how is the artist protecting that? Is this becoming something that they're identifying their brand with? And that might get into trademark and branding and trade dress issues, which if you're following the law is becoming more and more of a concern these days as artists are creating things that kind of like Evan, we were talking about at the very start of this, like they're a little more temporary, they're a little more fleeting, and they might not have the traditional copyright strength, but might be more of a calling card for the artist that they're going to then rely back on. So thinking about that is something to consider. And I will say, just having represented many production companies in the past, when in doubt, always get permission. We don't like to rely on fair use, especially for putting something in a video or a large photo or a commercial campaign, more importantly, which is going to have a higher threshold. So think about those things. But certainly, Josh, like, yeah, your preliminary question is, yeah, there is an understanding of fair use, of permissibility of taking photos and videos of those things that you wouldn't be allowed to in other circumstances, and that's just by virtue of it being out in the literal public.
The
Got a couple minutes left. Yeah, Evan, please.
the hard balance, like the to that point about sort of fair use in public spaces, whenever I put out the what I really wanted was organic engagement and that connect to me and my work. And that was something that I think was lacking in the previous iteration. Like in the Blink installation, like people know the installation, but they don't know it's connected to me. Um, and that's been a hard thing for me to navigate, but I think that's why you see like if Nike does a giant thing in the middle of Times Square, they'll have the whole installation and then a big Nike logo on the side
Yeah.
or like however they decide to illuminate that. It made me realize the importance of a brand mark or a logo because if somebody's just going to take a picture of this randomly, you'll be able to be like, "Oh, well, where's this from?" blah blah blah, and then you'll see like somebody's name or something associated with it. So I think
Yeah,
that
and
also
I don't think you're gonna. I can't imagine your next handful of installations are gonna have giant Evan on top of it anywhere in bright lights. But I think to your point, if you continue making things that look somewhat similar, that in and of itself is going to become your mark. And that's when you need to start thinking about broader things like trademarking and whatnot, because we're not going to get into it on this call, that's for sure. But the copyrightability of a tunnel of lights is maybe an open question, depending on what you do and how it's applied and whether we consider that a useful article. But that's a whole other conversation, probably for another webinar. We got a couple minutes left. I don't think we're seeing any new questions popping in here. Lorraine, you wanna finish us off maybe with one final question for Evan?
Oh my God, that puts so much pressure on me. Uh, yes, yes. Mm, okay. Mm. So how does working on either commercial projects or public art installations, what has that taught you about your own creative process and the way that you work?
Hmm. Well, I think I've never really, I think I'm a very structured person, and I've, I always thought it was a result of like just being a chaotic artist. And so I always never considered myself to be very structured until a few years down the road, I started telling people about my practice and things I do. And even like when people came to film me in my studio, they were like, this is the cleanest art studio I've ever been in. And I, I think that was a big thing that I learned about myself, but I think that's also like been really helpful in trying to sort of organize the chaos of being an artist and like I can come up with a wacky idea, but whenever I have those constraints, it feels constraints like okay, here's the space, here's the alley, here's the format of the visual. It's a lot easier to kind of like add some magic to it. So that's been like a big thing that I've realized about myself.
Cool. We're about at time. So Evan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Any parting words or things you want to impart before we shut this thing down?
Just feel free to hit me up at my email. It's Evan or EA Verrilli, V as in Victor, ERRI at LLI at gmail.com. I'm on Instagram at evan.is.social, or you can see my work at evanverrilli.com.
And we'll
Otherwise,
post all your information about how to get hold of Evan or how to follow him when this is up on YouTube, as well as probably in some email newsletters. So likewise, if you aren't getting our newsletters already and want to sign up, just go to our website, adamweissmanlaw.com. Evan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you these last handful of years, both as your client and vice versa. And I'm really excited to see what you come up with over the next handful of years going forward. I would thank you so much for joining us. We'll say everyone who's attending now, as per usual, we will be doing another one next month. Next month, we are chatting with another client of ours, an excellent product photographer. Won't talk too much about him now, but please keep following us, check us out. And as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Lorraine or myself. Have a very wonderful rest of your week and see you all soon.
thanks, so.
Thank you.